We continue Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough, by beginning Caius Gracchus. Caius Gracchus, at first, either for fear of his brother's enemies, or designing to render them more odious to the people, absented himself from the public assemblies, and lived quietly in his own house, as if he were not only reduced for the present to live unambitiously, but was disposed in general to pass his life in inaction, and some indeed went so far as to say that he disliked his brother's measures, and had wholly abandoned the defense for them. However, he was not but very young, being not so old as Tiberius by 9 years, and he was not yet 30 when he was slain. In some little time, however, he quietly let his temper appear, which was one of an utter antipathy to a lazy retirement, an effeminacy, and not the least likely to be contented with the life of eating, drinking, and money-getting. He gave great pains to the study of eloquence, as wings upon which he might aspire to public business, and it was very apparent that he did not intend to pass his days in obscurity. When Vettius, a friend of his, was on his trial, he defended his cause, and the people were in an ecstasy, and transported with joy, finding him master of such eloquence that the other orators seemed like children in comparison, and jealousies and fears, on the other hand, began to be felt by the powerful citizens, and it was generally spoken of amongst them that they must hinder Caius from being made tribune. But soon after, as it happened, that he was elected quaestor, and obliged to attend Orestes the consul into Sardinia. This, as it pleased his enemies, so it was not ungrateful to him, being naturally of a warlike character, and as well trained in the art of war as in that of pleading, and besides, as he very much dreaded meddling with state affairs, and appearing publicly in the rostra, which, because of the importunity of the people and his friends, could not otherwise avoid than by taking this journey, he was therefore most thankful for the opportunity of absenting himself, notwithstanding which it is the prevailing opinion that Caius was a far more thorough demagogue. Tumbly. Trying to fix that. And more ambitious than ever. Tiberius had been a popular applause, yet it is certain that he was born rather by a sort of necessity than by any purpose of his own into the public business, and Cicero, the orator, relates that when he declined all such concerns and would have lived privately, his brother appeared to him in a dream, and calling him by his name, said, "Why do you tarry, Caius? There is no escape. One life and one death is appointed for us both, to spend the one and to meet the other in the service of the people." Caius was no sooner arrived in Sardinia, but he gave exemplary proofs of his high merit. He not only excelled all the young men of his age in his actions against his enemies, in doing justice to his inferiors, and in showing all obedience and respect to his superior officer, but likewise in temperance, frugality, and industry. He surpassed even those. Pardon me, that's what you say when you burp. He surpassed even those who were much older than himself. It happened to be a sharp and sickly winter in Sardinia, insomuch that the general was forced to lay an imposition upon several towns to supply the soldiers with necessary clothes. The city sent to Rome petitioning to be excused from that burden. The Senate found the request reasonable, and ordered the general to find some other way of new clothing the army. While he was at a loss what course to take in this affair, the soldiers were reduced to great distress. But Caius went from one city to another, and by his mere representations he prevailed with them that of their own accord they clothed the Roman army. This again being reported to Rome, and seeming to be only an intimation of what was to be expected of him as a popular leader hereafter, raised new jealousies amongst the senators. And besides, there came ambassadors out of Africa from King Micipsa to acquaint the Senate that their master, out of respect to Caius Gracchus, had sent a considerable quantity of corn. They mean grain. What was the popular grain? Did they eat spelt or barley, or what did they eat? Well, they had wheat from Africa, and to the general in Sardinia, at which the senators were much offended, that they turned the ambassadors out of the Senate house, and made an order that the soldiers should be relieved by sending others in the room, but that Orestes should continue at his post, with whom Caius also, as they presumed, being his quaestor, would remain. But he, finding how things were carried, immediately in anger took ship for Rome, where his unexpected appearance obtained him in the censure, not only of his enemies, but also of the people, who thought it strange that a quaestor should leave before his commander. Nevertheless, when some accusation upon this ground was made against him to the censors, he desired leave to defend himself, and did it so effectually that when he ended, he was regarded as one who had been very much injured. He made it then appear that he had served 12 years in the army, whereas others are obliged to serve only 10, that he had continued quaestor to the general 3 years, whereas he might by law have returned at the end of 1 year, and alone of all who went on the expedition he had carried out a fool, and had brought home an empty purse, while others, after drinking up the wine they had carried out with them, brought back the wine jars filled again with gold and silver from the war. After this they brought other accusations and writs against him for exciting insurrection amongst the allies, and being engaged in the conspiracy that was discovered about Fregala. But having cleared himself of every suspicion and proved his entire innocence, he now at once came forward to ask for the tribuneship, in which, though he was universally opposed by all persons of distinction, yet there came such infinite numbers of people from all parts of Italy to vote for Caius, that lodgings for them could not be supplied in the city, and the field being not large enough to contain the assembly, there were numbers who climbed upon the roofs and the tilings of the houses to use their voices in his favor. However, the nobility so far forced the people to their pleasure, and disappointed Caius's hope that he was not returned the first, as was expected, but the 4th tribune. But when he came to the execution of his office, it was seen presently who was really 1st tribune, as he was a better orator than any of his contemporaries, and the passion with which he still lamented his brother's death made him the bolder in speaking, and he used on all occasions to remind the people of what had happened in that tumult, and laid before them the examples of their ancestors, how they declared war against the Faliscans only for giving scurrilous language to one Genochius, a tribune of the people, and sentenced Caius Gracchus to death for refusing to give way in the forum to a tribune. Yeah, obviously not enough death penalties, but a death penalty for something. No, maybe one lash or something. No, you should move it out of the way. But any more than that's kind of obviously going too far, right? Whereas, said he, these men did in the presence of you all murder Tiberius with clubs, and dragged the slaughtered body through the middle of the city to be cast into the river. Even his friends, as many as could be taken, were put to death immediately, without any trial, notwithstanding that just and ancient custom which has always been observed in our city, that whenever anyone is accused of capital crime and does not make his personal appearance in court, a trumpeter is sent in the morning to his lodging to summon him by sound of trumpet to appear, and before this ceremony is performed, the judges do not proceed to the vote. So cautious and reserved were our ancestors about business of life and death. So automatically finding people guilty is, still wasn't the thing. Having, because what they are, whether they show up to the court or not, it's maybe guilty for that, but not the other. Having moved the people's passion with such addresses, and his voice was of the loudest and strongest, he proposed 2 laws. The first was that whoever was turned out of any public office by the people should be thereby considered incapable of bearing any office afterwards. The second, that if any magistrate condemned a Roman to be banished without a legal trial, the people be authorized to take cognizance thereof. One of these laws was manifestly leveled at Marcus Octavius, who, at the instigation of Tiberius, had been deprived of his tribuneship. The other touched Popilius, who in his praetorship had banished all Tiberius's friends, whereupon Popilius, being unwilling to stand the hazard of a trial, fled out of Italy. As for the former law, it was withdrawn by Caius himself, who said he yielded in the case of Octavius at the request of his mother Cornelia. This was very acceptable and pleasing to the people, who had a great veneration for Cornelia, not more for the sake of her father than for that of her children, and they afterwards erected a statue of brass in honor of her with this inscription: Cornelia, the mother of Gracchus. There are several expressions recorded in which he used her name, perhaps with too much rhetoric and too little self-respect, in his attacks upon his adversaries. How, said he, dare you presume to reflect upon Cornelia, the mother of Tiberius? And because the person who made the reflections have been suspected of effeminate courses. A lot of overstatement with what's masculine or feminine, but with what face, said he, can you compare Cornelia with yourself? Have you brought forth children as she has done? And yet all Rome knows that she has refrained from the conversation of men longer than you yourself have done. Such was the bitterness he used in his language, and numerous similar expressions might be adduced from his written remains. Of the laws which he now proposed, with the object of gratifying the people and abridging the power of the Senate, the first was concerning the public lands, which were to be divided amongst the poor citizens. Another was concerning the common soldiers, that they should be clothed at the public charge without any diminution of their pay, and that none should be obliged to serve in the army. who was not full 17 years old. Another gave the same right to all the Italians in general of voting at elections, and was enjoyed by the citizens of Rome. A fourth related to the price of corn, which was to be sold at a lower rate than formerly to the poor, and a fifth regarded the courts of justice, greatly reducing the power of the senators, for hitherto in all causes senators only sat as judges, and were therefore much dreaded by the Roman knights and the people. But Caius joined 300 ordinary citizens of equestrian rank with the senators, who were 300 likewise in number, and ordained that the judicial authority should be equally invested in the 600. While he was arguing for the ratification of this law, his behavior was observed to show, in many respects, unusual earnestness, and, whereas other popular leaders had always hitherto, when speaking, turned their faces towards the Senate House and the place called the Comitium, he, on the contrary, was the first man that, in his harangue to the people, turned himself the other way, towards them, and continued after that time to do so. An insignificant movement and change of posture, yet it marked no small revolution in state affairs. The conversion, in a manner, of the whole government from an aristocracy to a democracy, his action intimating that public speakers should address themselves to the people, not to the Senate. Well, in theory, that could be the thing, right? But just turning doesn't make it a democracy, but it's definitely a step towards it, right? Because the Senate and the House of Representatives and all that stuff is not supposed to, or whatever your system of government in your country, they're supposed to serve the people, not their own interests that they've privately made deals with.